I swear, that morning felt like it had been ripped straight out of one of those picture-perfect commercials. Sunny, warm, the kind of day that tricks you into thinking life is gentle. I'd booked the family photo shoot weeks in advance, hoping it would soften the strange distance growing between me and my husband. You know that distance. The one that starts quietly, like a draft coming through a cracked window. I kept telling myself it was just stress, that maybe a sweet little anniversary shoot would pull us back together. I wanted memories, real ones, not the stiff, polite moments we'd been collecting lately. So I wore my favorite dress, the blue one he used to say made my eyes look like trouble. The studio smelled like fresh paint and warm lights, that weird mix of chemicals and comfort you only find in creative spaces. Oliver, the photographer, greeted us with this soft smile, but it faded the second he looked at my husband. It wasn't subtle either. His eyes widened just a fraction, his jaw clenched, and he blinked like he was seeing a ghost wearing my husband's clothes. My husband let out this awkward laugh and said Oliver must be mixing him up with some other guy. But the way Oliver's hands trembled as he adjusted his camera told a different story. I felt something tighten in my stomach, like my body recognized danger before my mind did. Every click of the camera sounded painfully loud, as if the room were exposing the tension none of us dared to name. My husband kept offering these forced smiles that never reached his eyes, and I kept pretending not to notice. Oliver, poor man, kept stealing glances at him between shots. Quick little flicks, the kind you make when you're trying not to stare at a car crash happening in real time. At one point, he almost called my husband by another name but caught himself mid-breath, swallowing the syllable like it burned. I didn't understand what was happening, but I felt the ground begin to shift under me. I kept trying to focus on the poses, tilt my chin, soften my smile, hold his hand just right, but the air felt heavy, like the room itself knew something I didn't. My husband squeezed my waist a little too tightly at one point, whispering that Oliver was acting weird and that I should just ignore it. The tone he used, it reminded me of the way someone talks when they're trying to keep a lid on something boiling inside. I nodded, but inside, this uneasy flutter started spreading through my chest. You know when your intuition taps your shoulder then slaps you across the face? Yeah. Right about then, it started stinging. Oliver pretended everything was fine, but his nervous energy was impossible to hide. When he asked my husband to look at me the way he used to, his voice cracked ever so slightly, like he already knew my husband didn't have that look anymore. My husband forced a chuckle, muttering something about photographers being dramatic artists. But Oliver avoided eye contact and focused on the lens instead. The lights felt too bright, almost exposing something that hadn't been said aloud yet. I swear my palms felt damp just from holding my husband's hand, his fingers cold, his smile brittle. Somewhere near the end, when Oliver asked us to stand closer, he glanced at my husband and flinched, as if the sight of him physically hurt. That moment stuck with me, like a thorn I couldn't pull out. My husband shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar, insisting Oliver had to be mistaken. I watched the photographer's eyes soften, but not with kindness. More like pity, the kind you give someone right before telling them the truth they'll hate. When the session finally wrapped, I felt this strange pressure on my chest, like the day had cracked open without warning, and I hadn't even seen what was inside yet. As we gathered our things, Oliver cleared his throat in this shaky, hesitant way that instantly made me turn around. He avoided looking directly at my husband, focusing instead on the strap of his camera as if it suddenly needed adjusting. My husband nudged me, whispering that we should go because he had a ton of work to catch up on later. But Oliver stepped forward, gently touching my arm. Not in a familiar way, but in that careful, almost apologetic way people use when they're about to cross a line they never wanted to approach. The hairs on my neck stood up. He asked my husband if he could give us just one moment, And the tone. God, it was so fragile it made my stomach drop. My husband scoffed under his breath, saying photographers were always trying to upsell something, and that we didn't have time for this. Oliver ignored the comment completely and motioned for me to step aside with him. My heart thudded so hard I could feel the pulse in my ears. Something inside me whispered that whatever he was about to say would change everything. And I swear, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. When we reached the corner of the studio, away from my husband's irritated sighs, Oliver finally looked me in the eyes. His voice dropped to almost a whisper as he asked me if my husband's name was truly what I'd told him. I nodded, confused and uneasy. And then I watched the color drain from his face, like he'd been holding a truth too heavy to carry much longer. He swallowed hard and said, "I need to show you something, but not here." That sentence echoed inside me, sharp and cold, leaving a crack in the perfect day I thought I'd planned. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying Oliver's pale face and the way his voice trembled when he asked to meet elsewhere. It felt like waiting for a storm that refuses to break, heavy clouds just hanging over your chest. I didn't tell my husband where I was going the next morning. He'd already left for an early meeting, which suddenly felt a lot like a lie dressed up in a suit. I drove to Oliver's studio with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Every part of me knew I was walking toward something I couldn't unlearn. When I arrived, the studio was closed to the public. Lights off, door slightly ajar like he'd been pacing and forgot to close it properly. Oliver looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept either, and maybe he hadn't. He offered me a seat, but my legs were shaking too much to sit, so I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for the blow I could feel tightening in my stomach. Oliver kept wringing his hands as he explained he didn't want to interfere in anyone's marriage, but that he couldn't pretend he hadn't recognized my husband. His voice cracked again, and I swear the room felt colder. Finally, he walked to his computer, clicked open a folder, and stepped aside so I could see the screen. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The first image hit me like a punch. My husband, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at me in years, his arms wrapped around a woman I'd never seen before. The next picture, he was kissing her forehead. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to keep looking. Oliver whispered that these were from a pre-wedding session he shot just 2 weeks earlier. And I swear, I felt something inside me shatter so quietly it almost sounded like relief. I leaned closer to the screen, even though every instinct screamed for me to look away. The woman in the photos looked blissfully unaware, her smile soft, her hand resting on my husband's chest like she believed she belonged there. And him, God. He looked at her the way he used to look at me when we first met, back when he said I was the only thing that ever felt like home. I felt this slow, cold wave crawl up my spine, numbing everything it touched. My throat tightened so badly I could barely swallow, and my hands shook as I reached for the desk to steady myself. Oliver apologized over and over, saying he didn't know what to do when he saw my husband walk into the studio with me yesterday. He said he recognized him instantly, said that during the other couple's shoot my husband had introduced himself with the same name, same smile, same voice, same stupid laugh. Oliver said he thought maybe he misheard, until he saw us pose together. I could barely speak. I felt like someone had stuffed cotton into my chest, swelling it with pressure until it hurt to breathe. The world suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too cruelly detailed. I whispered something like, "Are you sure?" Even though the images on the screen were undeniable. Oliver gently clicked through more photos. My husband brushing the woman's hair back, helping her adjust her dress, pointing toward the horizon like he was planning their future. The intimacy in those gestures made my stomach twist in on itself. That was the moment the denial died. I pressed a hand to my mouth, terrified I might break right there in front of him. Oliver placed a small USB drive on the table and said he thought I should have the files. Because truth, once seen, shouldn't be taken away again. I walked out of the studio with the USB drive clenched so tightly in my fist, it left little grooves in my palm. The air outside felt different, thinner, harsher, like the world itself had shifted while I was inside learning the truth. I stood by my car, staring at nothing, feeling this strange mixture of heartbreak and clarity settling over me. It was as if all the unanswered questions, all the late nights, all the distant excuses suddenly lined up in a neat, cruel row. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I had been living with a man who had been building another life right under my nose. The drive home felt unreal, like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my body. My husband texted me asking if I could pick up something for dinner because he'd be home late. Again. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, feeling this bitter laugh bubble up in my chest. 2 weeks ago, he was taking pre-wedding photos with another woman, and now he was asking me to pick up groceries like nothing in the world was wrong. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The betrayal sat in my throat like metal, heavy and cold. By the time I got home, a strange calm had settled over me. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but something sharper. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or cry or demand explanations he'd probably twist into lies. Instead, I did the one thing that terrified him most. I stayed silent. I needed more. I needed proof he couldn't deny, couldn't spin, couldn't talk his way out of. I placed the USB drive on my nightstand and whispered to myself that I wouldn't be blindsided again. If he thought he could build a secret future without me, then I'd make sure he watched it collapse. That night, after he finally came home smelling like cologne I didn't wear and excuses I didn't believe, I pretended to be half asleep. He kissed my forehead like a man who deserved trust, then showered, humming some tune he never hummed around me anymore. And while the water ran, I opened his laptop, something I'd never done before, out of respect for a loyalty he clearly didn't return. My hands shook so badly I had to steady them on the desk, but I kept going. The truth was already bleeding into my life. I wasn't going to turn away now. At first, everything looked normal. Emails, work files, the usual clutter. But then I found a folder buried under layers of generic names, the kind men pick when they're hiding something. Project Notes 3. Inside it, screenshots of a wedding venue confirmation, my husband's name listed as the groom, a date chosen, a package paid in full. I felt my stomach twist so violently I had to cover my mouth. He'd told me he was visiting his sick uncle that weekend. I remembered crying on the couch while waiting for his updates, and he was out choosing champagne with another woman. Before I knew it, I was digging deeper. Bank statements, calendar reminders, travel receipts. Each click felt like tightening a knot around my own chest. But there it was, in plain text, the bride-to-be's name, her phone number, and notes about finalizing the menu. I stared at the screen so long my eyes burned, and with every new piece of evidence, something inside me shifted. Not just anger, not just heartbreak, something colder. A clarity that didn't shake this time. I closed the laptop, breathing in slowly, and realized I wasn't searching anymore. I was planning. The next morning, while he rushed out the door claiming he had back-to-back meetings, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold. My hands wrapped around the mug just to feel something warm, something steady. I started writing down every detail I'd found, dates, locations, names, watching the truth assemble itself like a puzzle I never wanted to solve. The more I wrote, the more I realized his lies weren't impulsive mistakes. They were architecture. He'd built this double life carefully, lovingly, the way he should have built our marriage. I called the wedding venue pretending to be a scatterbrained event planner confirming details. My voice shook at first. But the receptionist didn't notice, or didn't care. She happily confirmed the reservation, cheerfully listing the bride-to-be's name like she was giving me the weather forecast. When she mentioned the exact date, the one he claimed he'd spend visiting family, my stomach dropped so hard I thought I'd be sick. I thanked her sweetly, hung up, and just sat there staring at my phone. My heart wasn't breaking anymore. It was hardening. That afternoon, I printed the pre-wedding photos Oliver had given me, one by one, each image cutting deeper than the last. I spread them across my dining table, the same table where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, and realized I didn't recognize the man in them at all. He looked free, joyful, recklessly in love, and not with me. But instead of crying, I felt something else rise inside me, a calm, deliberate fury. If he thought he could celebrate a secret future while erasing me from it, then I would make damn sure I was present at the moment everything came crashing down. By evening, the house felt too quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood in our bedroom staring at my reflection, wondering how many lies had been whispered to that woman with my face. My stomach twisted, remembering how he once told me I overthought everything, how he insisted I was too emotional, how he claimed I made problems out of thin air. God, the way he weaponized my trust, now made my skin crawl. But instead of collapsing under it, I felt my backbone straighten. His gaslighting no longer confused me, it clarified everything. I opened my jewelry drawer, not looking for anything in particular, just grounding myself. Inside was our wedding album, tucked away years ago when things started feeling off. I flipped through it slowly, his hand on my cheek, his vows about honesty, his promise to build every future with me. Each page felt like a slap, but it also fueled something sharp and relentless inside me. I remembered the woman I was that day, hopeful, trusting, blind. I wasn't her anymore, and the man next to her had never deserved her in the first place. Then, almost without thinking, I picked up one of Oliver's photos. The one where my husband kissed the other woman's forehead, that intimate little gesture he used to save for me. I held it up to the light, studying every detail, every smile, every lie preserved in pixels. And that was when the idea first settled into me. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and precise, like a seed rooting itself. I wouldn't confront him yet. I wouldn't scream or beg or give him the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. No, I would wait. And when the moment came, he would see exactly who he underestimated. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside a quaint little boutique bakery, the one the bride-to-be had tagged on her Instagram as our cake tasting spot. My heart thudded against my ribs, but not from fear this time. From purpose. I walked inside, pretending to admire the pastries, rehearsing the role I'd decided to play, a friendly cake designer looking to collaborate. When the fiancé walked in minutes later, I recognized her instantly from the photos. Soft features, hopeful eyes, the kind of glow you only get when you think your future is safe. My throat tightened, but I smiled anyway. She approached the counter humming, completely unaware that the woman standing beside her was the wife of her perfect man. When she heard me inquire about wedding cake samples, she lit up and joined the conversation without hesitation. She told me she was getting married soon, her voice airy, almost musical, gushing about her fiancé like he'd been handcrafted by fate itself. She said he was so respectful, so attentive, and so good at communicating feelings. I nearly choked on my own breath hearing her list qualities he hadn't shown me in years. But I nodded, playing along. We ended up sitting at a small table by the window, tasting slices of buttercream and red velvet while she talked about her dream man. Every lie he'd ever told her spilled effortlessly out of her mouth, how he'd said he was divorced, how his ex-wife was controlling and jealous, how he finally felt safe and understood. Each word hit me like a flicked match, igniting something bitter but controlled inside me. She looked so genuine, so painfully innocent, and for a moment, I didn't know if I wanted to scream or hug her. But instead, I carefully placed a subtle clue in her path, one she wouldn't notice until much later. The clue I left her was small, so small it could have been dismissed as coincidence. A business card, tucked discreetly into the folder of cake samples she eagerly gathered before leaving. My name printed clearly. My real last name. The one her future husband shared with me. I watched her walk out of the bakery, humming again, blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb she carried in her hands. Part of me felt cruel. Another part felt justified. She wasn't the enemy, but she was living in the kingdom he built on my bones. Hours later, after I'd returned home, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I knew exactly who it was even before I answered. Her voice was trembling, thin, shaky, unraveling at the edges. She asked who I was, her words stumbling over themselves. I didn't answer right away. I could hear the panic rising in her breathing, the way someone sounds when the ground beneath them begins to crack. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice steady, almost gentle. I told her she should meet me tomorrow, that I would bring the truth, and she deserved to see it with her own eyes. The silence on her end stretched painfully long before she whispered, "Is he lying to me?" The question broke something in me, not out of empathy for him, but for her. I'd been that woman once, believing every scripted line, trusting every half smile, thinking love was enough to shield me from betrayal. I told her to come to a small cafe downtown, that I'd be sitting by the window with a folder. She agreed in a cracked voice. And when I hung up, I felt something settle inside me again. A calm resolve, sharp and cold, ready for tomorrow's reckoning. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a corner table where the sunlight spilled in just enough to soften the edges of everything around me. I placed the folder, the photos, the venue receipts, the printouts, right in the center of the table like a quiet, waiting truth. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight, as if the past and present were colliding inside me. When she walked in, she looked smaller than she had the day before, like her confidence had been wrung out overnight. Her eyes scanned the room until they found mine, and I saw the fear in them. She sat down slowly, like she wasn't sure the chair would hold her. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her purse before she finally whispered, "Please, just tell me." I didn't ease her into it. Mercy wasn't what either of us needed. I opened the folder and slid the first photo toward her, my husband, her fiancé, kissing her forehead during the pre-wedding session. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears welled instantly. Then I placed another photo, then another, and her composure crumbled piece by piece. Watching her break wasn't satisfying. It was familiar. When she finally found her voice, it came out shattered. "He told me you were unstable, that you couldn't let him go." I let out a small, bitter laugh. Not at her, but at the predictability of a man with two lives. I explained everything calmly, every lie he'd ever told me, every moment I doubted my own sanity because he insisted I imagined his distance. She cried harder, shaking her head as if trying to undo the reality forming in front of her. By the time she looked up again, her tears had dried into something else, something sharp, determination. And when she said she wanted to ruin him with me, I didn't hesitate. I nodded. We spent the next 2 days stitching together the truth like a tapestry meant to suffocate every lie he'd ever told. Screenshots, dates, receipts, photos, each piece a thread he'd handed us willingly through his own arrogance. The fiancé, no, the woman he lied to, showed up at my house with swollen eyes and a fire I recognized all too well. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place I had cried alone months earlier, now covered in evidence of his double life. And for the first time, neither of us felt small. We felt aligned, dangerous even. She told me his rehearsal dinner was coming up, that all his friends and extended family would be there, thinking they were celebrating the man he pretended to be. I felt my pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the precise clarity of a plan falling into place. We agreed we wouldn't yell, we wouldn't accuse. We would present the truth like a beautifully wrapped gift he never asked for. A performance he didn't know he'd be starring in. I could almost hear his voice already, stumbling over excuses, insisting we were confused, overreacting, trying to ruin his happiness. On the day of the rehearsal dinner, I dressed slowly, choosing an outfit that made me feel unshakable, something elegant, something that didn't tremble. The other woman arrived at my door, her chin lifted, her eyes steady despite the devastation still lingering behind them. We drove in silence, the kind that isn't empty but charged, like air before a storm breaks. When we reached the venue, I felt my heart thrum hard against my ribs, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. Today wasn't about heartbreak anymore. Today was about undoing him publicly, with truth as our witness. We walked into the venue like two women who had finally stopped apologizing for the pain someone else caused. The room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of people celebrating a future that didn't exist. He stood near the stage, rehearsing his vows with that performative sincerity he used on everyone except me. When he saw us, his smile faltered just enough to betray him before he tried to smooth it over. He excused himself from the small crowd, walking toward us with the confidence of a man who still believed he could charm his way out of anything. He asked what we were doing there, his voice strained but still trying to sound warm, like this was all some adorable misunderstanding. He even reached for the other woman's arm, insisting she shouldn't listen to strangers trying to sabotage their happiness. She flinched away from him like his touch burned. I could see the panic spark in his eyes then. Small at first, like a candle flicker, then growing. I told him we had something to share with everyone, and the way his jaw tightened told me he knew exactly what was coming. He begged under his breath for us to handle this privately. We didn't answer him. Instead, we stepped around him and walked straight to the small stage at the front of the room. The air shifted instantly, the laughter faded, conversations died mid-sentence. People turned toward us, curious, confused. My hands were steady as I set down the folder. The other woman lifted her chin and spoke first, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "Before you celebrate him," she said, "you should know who he really is." Gasps rippled through the room as we began laying out the truth, photo by photo, lie by lie. The first photo hit the room like a dropped bomb. My husband kissing her forehead during their pre-wedding session, projected larger than life on the venue's screen. People gasped, some covered their mouths, others turned to stare at him with wide, horrified eyes. I watched his face drain of color, watched his confidence shatter into something brittle and pathetic. He stammered that it wasn't what it looked like, that we were misinterpreting everything, but his voice cracked under the weight of the lies finally catching up to him. And God, I didn't feel pity. I felt power. The other woman stepped forward, holding up the receipt from the venue he booked behind both our backs. Her voice was sharper now, steadier. She explained how he'd promised her a future built on honesty, how he'd painted me as a villain to justify his own betrayal. He tried to cut her off, insisting she was being dramatic, the same line he had used on me 1,000 times. But no one believed him, not when the evidence shone on the wall behind us like a spotlight exposing a fraud. The room felt heavy with judgment, and he knew it. Finally, I took my turn. I told the room how he'd dismissed my intuition for years, how he said I invented problems, how he told me I needed help when I questioned his late nights and secretive phone habits. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth did the tearing for me. By the time I finished, he was standing alone, shoulders caved in, his future collapsing in front of everyone who once praised him. And as I walked past him, calm, composed, untouched by his desperation, I realized he wasn't losing just 2 women. He was losing the version of himself he'd tried so hard to fool the world into believing.